Vladimir Putin is afraid, deeply afraid. What keeps him awake at night is not NATO or Washington, but the fear that he is losing Crimea. Ukraine's relentless campaign of drone and missile strikes has crippled Russia's oil industry, and the people of Crimea are now paying the price. Fuel is scarce, daily life is collapsing, and the frustration of ordinary residents is slowly transforming into open anger. Anger directed not at Ukraine, but at Moscow and the Kremlin. In Russia itself, any hint of revolt would normally be crushed by force. But Crimea is different. The peninsula is no longer safe for Russian troops. Ukrainian drones and precision missiles strike bases and commanders almost daily, turning Crimea into a battlefield where Moscow's power looks fragile. Faced with this collapse, Putin is resorting to desperate measures. He has begun pressuring European leaders, demanding they rein in Ukraine or risk Russian retaliation against NATO itself. It is blackmail, an act of desperation from a leader who senses his grip slipping. But instead of saving him, it risks making the situation even worse. On the ground in Crimea, order is unraveling. Scenes that look eerily similar to the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s are unfolding once more. Gasoline theft is rampant. Black markets thrive, and mafia groups are re-emerging as daily life disintegrates. Lines at gas stations stretch for hours, when stations even have fuel to sell. Half of them are already empty. Prices have soared from 60 to 100 rubles per liter, and even the Kremlin cannot deny that Russia is running out of petrol. Even state media, usually silent about Russia's troubles, has been forced to admit that the crisis is real. Reports openly describe soaring inflation, shortages in the regions, and refineries repeatedly knocked offline by Ukrainian drones. Moscow has imposed price controls and rationing in Crimea, limiting drivers to just 30 liters a day with special coupons, but none of it solves the problem. Instead, it drags the peninsula back into the worst habits of Soviet times. For Crimeans, this is more than an inconvenience. It is a betrayal. The Kremlin once promised that annexation meant prosperity, integration, and protection. Instead, residents face empty pumps, skyrocketing utility bills, and collapsing services. Even loyal Kremlin supporters are beginning to mutter their discontent online. The head of the Crimean Tatar Assembly has warned that dissatisfaction is spreading. And while Russians are slow to rebel, unbearable living conditions can shift attitudes quickly. NATO leaders are watching closely. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte recently remarked that if Western societies faced similar fuel shortages, the result could be revolution. For Russia, a state dependent on oil and gas, the danger is even greater. Meanwhile, Ukraine is not letting up. Since late August, its strikes on Russian positions in Crimea have intensified. Airfields, aircraft, and ammunition depots destroyed almost daily. In some cases, entire groups of Russian officers have been wiped out in targeted attacks. Russian commanders know their positions are not safe, and each loss eats away at Moscow's ability to maintain control. All of this is rattling Putin personally. During the recent UN General Assembly, Russian diplomats were caught in closed-door meetings with European officials, pleading for pressure on Kiev. According to leaks, the Russians believe NATO is secretly helping Ukraine target Crimea, and they threaten to escalate attacks on European countries if the strikes continue. Extensive notes were taken to report directly to one man, Vladimir Putin. Crimea is not just a military outpost for him. It is the crown jewel of his career. When Putin returned to the presidency in 2012, Russians protested en masse, questioning his legitimacy. His approval ratings were faltering until the annexation of Crimea in 2014. That single act turned him into a national hero, lifting his popularity above 80% overnight. For millions of Russians, Crimea was proof of his strength, the land stolen in the Soviet collapse and restored by his leadership. But what happens if Crimea is lost again, under the same man who once promised it would be Russia's forever? That question terrifies Putin more than any NATO threat, because losing Crimea would not only expose his weakness to the world, it could unravel the very foundation of his power at home.